Welcome, and thank you for joining this webinar presenting the 2023 Notice of Funding Opportunity for the National Endowment for the Humanities Research and Development Grant Program. My name is Joshua Sternfeld. I'm a Senior Program Officer and Program Coordinator for Research and Development. I will begin this webinar by providing a brief history of research and development and its programmatic objectives, including the two funding levels that we offer and the conditions for applicant eligibility. Next, I will highlight some recent changes to our Notice of Funding Opportunity. I will also cover the components of the application submission, followed by a few examples of awards that we have funded at both levels of funding. I will conclude this presentation by outlining the application review process and some tips for preparing and submitting your application. For decades, even before the Research and Development Program was formally launched in 2006, NEH has supported innovative and groundbreaking research that has contributed essential knowledge on how to preserve humanities collections. NEH awards have supported, for example, the early development of the online resource for discovering information about persons, families, and organizations documented in historical resources, known as Social Networks in Archival Context, or SNAC. SNAC has since grown to become an international cooperative of archives, libraries, and museums. Several R&D awards have furthered research into audiovisual preservation, such as Indiana University and Harvard University's development of the publication Sound Directions, Digital Preservation and Access for Global Audio Heritage. And numerous awards have contributed to our understanding of sustainable practices and emergency planning and response that included the development of the Preservation Environment Monitor, Data Logger, developed by the Image Permanence Institute, and the Emergency Response Salvage Wheel, developed by the American Institute for Conservation and Getty Conservation Institute. R&D is administered by NEH's Division of Preservation and Access, which is one of the 7 programmatic divisions and offices. The grant program's objective is to support the critical work for developing standards, tools, software, workflows, equipment specifications, convenings, metadata schema, data sets, or other products that contribute to improving the preservation of and access to humanities collections. Your project may work with any format or type of collection, including but not limited to audiovisual and time-based media, born digital assets, archaeological artifacts, manuscripts, rare books, artworks, archival records, and an assortment of other materials. R&D offers 2 levels of funding, what we call Tier 1 and Tier 2, that are designed to capture as broadly as possible the range of activities undertaken in an R&D project. Tier 1 projects may request funding for a period of performance of up to 2 years and $100,000 in outright funds. You might note that the maximum level of funding for this level has increased from the previous $75,000 maximum that was available in previous years. Tier 1 may support early planning for an advanced implementation project. This level can also support other activities, such as basic research, case studies, and discrete experiments, many of which may not endeavor to expand into a larger scale project. In addition, you may apply for a Tier 1 grant to update an existing or emerging standard methodology, tool, or workflow. For example, a particular software tool might be upgraded with notable adjustments from a 1.0 to 2.0 version, or a set of practices may be tailored to accommodate a targeted community of practitioners. Tier 2 projects are for a period of performance of up to 3 years and up to $350,000. Projects in this category should focus on the development of standards, practices, methodologies, and workflows designed to advance the field. Tier 2 projects may also undertake applied research to address needs within the preservation field. Finally, a Tier 2 award may support a wide-scale study with national or international impact. In a moment, I will address this new activity further. For all research and development applications, Tier 1 and Tier 2, the submission deadline is May 16, 2023. Any U.S. nonprofit organization with 501c3 tax-exempt status, accredited public, and 501c3 institutions of higher education, a unit of a state or local governmental agency, and federally recognized Native American tribal governments are eligible to apply for the Research and Development Grant Program. Individuals, along with foreign or for-profit entities, are not eligible to apply. There are a couple of issues of eligibility that applicants ask us frequently. First, we caution our applicants to avoid including overlapping project costs if you are applying for or have already received 2 or more federal grants. Secondly, we want to encourage eligible U.S. institutions to collaborate internationally. However, it is important to understand that NEH funds may not be used to make subawards to foreign organizations. You may obtain the services of foreign individuals or consultants to carry out programmatic activities on a fee-for-service basis. The R&D Notice of Funding Opportunity highlights 5 areas of special interest. These areas of special interest are only intended as a guide for potential applicants and in no way are intended to privilege certain types of projects over others. If you have a project that does not seem to fit one of these areas, you should still apply. The first 2 areas are long-standing interests of this grant program. We continue to encourage projects that support work to advance the preservation and access of audiovisual, time-based, and digital materials, from the earliest recording formats to the most recent born digital assets. We also continue to have a vested interest in advancing work in conservation science, which we see as fundamental to supporting the essential work of preserving our material heritage. The third category covers the significant work involved with preserving cultural heritage materials that may be imperiled due to armed conflict, war, looting, natural disasters, economic development, poor management, and tourism. This special interest appears in several of our grant programs, and you will find a link to more information about it in our posted NOFO for R&D. We also encourage projects developing ethical, community-centered, indigenous, or trauma-informed methods, practices, and tools. Such outputs should benefit the work of preservation practitioners, source communities, or users involved with the preservation of and access to humanities collections for underrepresented communities, including minoritized and indigenous communities and persons with disabilities. Finally, as climate change continues to threaten heritage institutions, we encourage projects investigating the advancement of sustainability and resilience. I would like to draw attention to recent updates to our R&D Notice of Funding Opportunity. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is an additional special interest to investigate sustainability and resilience, especially in the context of changing climate conditions. This may include, for example, the development of disaster mitigation strategies, investigating the role of community infrastructure in realizing successful preservation strategies, or improving documentation and survey practices. Secondly, we have introduced a new activity category for Tier 2 advanced implementation projects. Applicants may undertake a topic or area study in heritage preservation and access. Projects may propose some combination of convenings such as forums, symposia, workshops, or conferences, surveys, and other qualitative and quantitative modes of investigations that would result in publications, resources, guidelines, or an agenda for collective action with substantial national or international interest. NEH proudly announced a new wide-ranging special initiative, American Tapestry, Weaving Together Past, Present, and Future, which seeks to tackle some of the most pressing challenges of our time, strengthening our democracy, advancing equity for all, and addressing our changing climate. We have launched several new NEH programs tied to the themes of American Tapestry. Nevertheless, you may want to consider how your R&D project may align with one or more of these themes, such as investigating methods for improving institutional resilience or developing field-wide standards for preserving and making accessible collections that document historically underrepresented groups. NEH also encourages projects that include Native American organizations and communities as applicants and project partners. Please note that research and development projects that do not address one of the themes under American Tapestry are still eligible to apply, and we will give all applications equal consideration in accordance with the program's review criteria. Measuring the impact of an R&D award can be tricky, but in general, it involves delivering the knowledge, data, standards, methods, practices, or tools produced during the project into the hands of humanities and preservation practitioners. In some cases, especially for larger Tier 2 applied research projects, you might want to consider implementing a dissemination plan as part of your award that can help improve your results through testing and audience engagement. You might also want to consider applying in the future to one of our division's complementary programs, Preservation and Access Education and Training. This program supports continuing education opportunities for up to 3 years and $350,000 that provide professionals with extended or specialized training in new or current preservation and access topics. Some awardees have successfully leveraged project results supported by one of these two programs to conduct additional work in the other. For example, WGBH received an R&D award in 2017 to develop the Public Broadcasting and Audiovisual Metadata Schema, PB Core, and then an Education and Training Award in 2021 to conduct an English and Spanish language PB Core webinar series and in-person workshops that targeted archivists and media professionals from small heritage institutions. In 2021, Rochester Institute of Technology's Image Permanence Institute implemented an online workshop series for training sustainable environmental management teams for cultural institutions that was designed in part based on experimental results gathered over several previous R&D awards. I would now like to take a moment to familiarize you with the components of the application. The core of your R&D application is the main narrative, which should include 7 sections as outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It may be useful to think about your application structured along 2 axes, one that discovers the significance of your project to the work of the humanities and preservation, and the other that covers technical and logistical elements of your project, such as personnel, methodology, and work plan. The most successful applications are those that can demonstrate how both axes complement one another towards structuring a project that is appropriate in its scope and objectives. The discussion of the significance of your project is broken into the first 3 sections of the narrative. For the significance to the humanities section, you will want to focus on how your R&D work would benefit the work of the humanities, such as humanities research, educational programming, and/or public programming. You want to address the overall research problem or challenge that your project will address, while also focusing on the types of collections under consideration. The second section, Preservation and Access Research Impact, should focus on how your project outcomes would benefit preservation practitioners, such as the conservators, archivists, librarians, curators, or other heritage professionals who may gain most directly from the data, methodologies, workflows, tools, or other products developed under your project. Finally, it is important to outline in the project history, scope, and duration section any prior work undertaken in preparation for your proposed project, as well as relevant research in the field. We encourage, but do not require, including an environmental scan and bibliography in the appendices, which may be useful in filling in any gaps that you are unable to cover in your narrative. If your project is one of several phases of work, you may want to outline subsequent stages either here in the main narrative or as an optional supplemental appendix. The second half of your main narrative will discuss the details of your project execution. You should discuss the methodologies that you anticipate using in conducting your experimental research, software development, data capture, and collections handling. For the work plan, we ask that you provide 2 versions, one in the main narrative and a separate required plan as an appendix. For the narrative, your work plan may outline the overall activities and schedule, whereas the work plan in the appendices should include a more detailed account. In drafting your plan, make sure to indicate the roles and responsibilities of each project team member, including those that may be hired during the project. Project sustainability and evaluation are critical areas to cover in your application and may be expressed differently depending on the context of your proposal. In some instances, You may want to cover how you propose to make your research data accessible, otherwise known as a data management plan. This may also be an opportunity to discuss your plans to secure outside support or community participation as needed. The following are the primary components you'll need to assemble for your application. A full listing of all required and conditionally required materials appear in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Some of the materials are standard forms, but for many of them, you will prepare a document and save it as a PDF for uploading into grants.gov. Please follow formatting requirements and naming conventions carefully. Most of these items are self-explanatory, but I would like to point out a few things. Our agency has shifted to using a standard budget form called the Research and Related Budget Form. A separate budget justification is required that offers requested information about certain budget items listed. You may also use the budget justification to include cost share. Please understand that cost sharing is voluntary and may be used in instances where the total costs exceed the amount awarded by NEH. Cost sharing will not be considered in the evaluation of applications. You will find detailed information in our Notice of Funding Opportunity explaining how to complete the budget form. But should you have additional questions about the budget, we encourage you to reach out to our colleagues in our Office of Grants Management who can assist you. As I mentioned earlier, you must supply a detailed work plan as a separate attachment, which is distinct from your discussion of your work plan in the main narrative. R&D projects are complex, so we encourage you to consider how activities may overlap or how project personnel may have multiple responsibilities. Please note that several attachments that used to be required are now recommended, which means that we encourage but do not require submission of these components. They include a bibliography and environmental scan, letters of commitment from project partners, letters of support, and additional supporting documentation that may further illustrate elements of your proposal. Please note that we have placed a maximum 50-page limit for additional supporting documentation, which may include, for example, a data management plan, sample work, a dissemination plan, or diversity plan. I would like to take a moment to discuss the qualities of a successful application. Research and development is intentionally broad in scope. We see this program as one that contributes to the work of the field by advancing preservation and humanities activities that we see executed in our other grant programs. Therefore, we encourage you to submit proposals that may have a degree of risk or experimentation. If I were to select one quality that nearly all our successful awards possess, it would be interdisciplinarity. Of the dozens of grant programs offered by NEH, research and development is perhaps one of the few that can support original scientific work. R&D awards have supported chemists, engineers, biologists, computer and information scientists, and a host of other types of scientist practitioners and scholars. It is truly an interdisciplinary program in the best sense of the term. As such, successful applications tend to have project teams that represent multiple disciplines or fields, which makes sense since, as we discussed earlier, applicants must demonstrate how their projects would benefit the work of the humanities, as well as the work of preservation practitioners. The best applications are those that are written by multiple key personnel who represent different domain expertise. A few examples of recent R&D awards might help illuminate the scope of the program, beginning with a Tier 1 project from Midwest Art Conservation Center, or MAC. As a prime example of this program's new special interest in studying the impact of climate change on humanities collections, MAC will survey the needs of at-risk public art collections and develop a reproducible, logical framework for assessing risk remotely. This Tier 1 phase is focusing on works managed by the Washington State Arts Commission, located in 6 counties as a testbed. Subsequent project phases would expand the study to the entire state and in the process create a downloadable toolkit that would be made available nationwide to assist institutions in their own emergency planning for collections. Just to remind you, a Tier 1 project does not have to work toward a larger implementation project. You may also conduct discrete case studies that contribute to the field by sharing lab results, publishing findings, or producing a prototype, among other possible outcomes. As I mentioned earlier, our Division of Preservation and Access has a long-standing commitment to supporting work in audiovisual and digital preservation. The University of South Carolina is conducting a 2-year project to develop 2 specialized open source software tools, the Virtual Bench Research Platform and Virtual Bench Compute, for improving the preservation and material study of digitized film. These tools will expand the standards of motion picture film digitization by automating processes associated with overscanning and improving access to the material study. As a result, overscanning historic film collections will become accessible to more heritage institutions, and researchers with limited resources for on-site travel to film archives will be able to conduct virtual frame-by-frame analysis. Research and development also supports applied research into accessibility of heritage materials. For example, the University of Hawaii at Manoa received a 3-year Tier 2 award to develop best practices for creating audio descriptions of humanities collections for the blind, visually impaired, and deafblind. The project team is refining their Descriptathon, a collaborative process designed to generate audio descriptions of selected items from heritage sites, such as maps, photographs, and historical artifacts. Partnering with the American Council of the Blind and the Helen Keller National Center, they are evaluating the resultant descriptions while simultaneously conducting a national survey, semi-structured interviews, focus groups, and A/B testing to gain an empirical understanding of the blind and visually impaired community's heritage access needs. Now that you have seen just a small sample of the types of projects funded by R&D, I would like to offer an overview of the application process. Applications for NEH grants, like many federal grants, are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. If you are new to the system, I would recommend spending some time familiarizing yourself with it before you submit your application. Your institution, if it has not done so already, needs to register at least a month before applying. We strongly urge that you apply early, as it gets overwhelmed in the immediate run-up to the midnight deadline. All NEH grant applications go through a lengthy review process, which has several stages. Following the submission deadline, NEH staff review applications for eligibility, according to the requirements outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. All eligible applications undergo the full review process. R&D applications are first sorted into panels with similar project objectives to help ensure a fair and objective review. The next review stage, and what we consider the foundation of our entire review process, is the peer review panel. Evaluators with expertise in the types of projects represented on the panel read the applications, write comments, and post a preliminary rating. Then they meet to discuss the applications, at which point they submit a final rating and any additional comments in support of their decision. You will note that the review criteria for R&D listed here adheres closely to the narrative sections, so it is in your interest to address each section in your proposal as thoroughly as you can. Following peer review, NEH staff recommends which applications should move forward. Those recommendations are considered by the National Council on the Humanities, 26 people nominated by the President and approved by the Senate. The Council makes recommendations to the endowment's chair, who takes all this into consideration and makes the decision on which to fund. As you might imagine, the life cycle of your application is quite a long process, but allows for rich review. After awards are announced, applicants can request the comments from their evaluators. If your proposal is not funded, the reviewer's comments can help you think about how to revise your proposal for next time. Now that you have a sense of the many steps of the review process, I would like to offer some general advice for preparing your application. The narrative is your opportunity to make the strongest possible case for your project. Don't assume that reviewers know anything about your institution or project beyond what you present in the narrative and application. While it may seem obvious, we cannot emphasize enough that the best narratives are those that adhere to the sections outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity and address all review criteria. Perhaps one of the most difficult challenges for R&D applicants is striking the right balance of technical or scientific language. Your application will be reviewed by a range of readers with varying backgrounds. Many reviewers may be your peers, and so it is important that you demonstrate your knowledge of the field and the most recent research or literature. Successful applications are those that can also explain the significance of your R&D work for a general educated audience who may be more interested in how your work will have an impact on the work of the humanities. In some instances, if you find your discussion of, say, your project methodology is becoming overly weighed down by terminology, you may want to consider shifting some of your explanation to a strategically included optional supplemental appendix. To get a sense of what makes for a successful R&D application, I strongly recommend reading examples of successful Tier 1 and Tier 2 narratives that you may find on the R&D program page. You may have noted that images used for this presentation represent successful R&D awards. If you would like to learn more about any of the projects featured during this presentation or review all R&D awards, you may conduct a search for a specific award number, institution, or type of project in our funded query database using the web address that you see at the bottom of the screen. Once you have reviewed the Notice of Funding Opportunity, I strongly recommend taking advantage of a service that we offer for this program. You may submit an optional draft to preservation at NEH.gov, which will be reviewed by program staff. This is a wonderful opportunity to receive direct feedback for your project. Your draft may be at any stage of development, but do make sure to submit it no later than April 17th, 2023. We tend to see the same errors from submitted applications. For R&D, often we receive projects that are overly focused on preserving a specific humanities collection at your institution. Such activities, when not tied to contributing to the broader knowledge of the preservation field, will typically not be competitive, and in some cases may be declared ineligible. We have several programs dedicated to preserving your institutional collections. We would hate for you to put a lot of work into preparing your application only to discover that your project would be better suited for another NEH program. If you have questions about whether R&D is the right program for your project, it is best to reach out to the Division of Preservation and Access and speak with a program officer. As I have mentioned before, always keep in mind that the humanities are central to what we do at NEH. It is the primary lens with which we review all grant proposals, even those that are scientifically based, as may be the case for an R&D project. Applicants often get into trouble when they don't plan. You want to make sure that you have enough time to study the guidelines, prepare the scope of your project, consult with partners, collaborators, and your administration, draft your application, and get feedback from colleagues. Evidence of an underprepared application tend to appear in a budget that does not adequately reflect the project activities or an underdeveloped discussion of the significance of your project. Finally, remember to adhere to page limits and file formats for all components of your application. Failure to follow the guidance will result in your application being declared ineligible. I hope this presentation has been useful in planning to apply to research and development. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have additional questions about the program. Thank you.